Hi everybody, hope you're doing great today. This is Paul from This Way to the Aquarium. In today's video I want to talk about quarantine tanks. So depending on how many tanks you have in your house, if you've got a number of tanks, having a quarantine tank can be helpful. Basically with a quarantine tank you can add new fish in there. If you've got an existing tank with fish in there and you're bringing in some new fish, putting those fish in that quarantine tank gives you time to observe those fish, make sure there's no diseases, there's no ailments that they're bringing along with them that could possibly infect your other fish. So the issue becomes is some of these fish that we purchase can be quite expensive. And so if you introduce a new fish, you put them in there, they happen to infect the other fish, and for whatever reason the treatment doesn't work, takes out your entire tank, that can be a pretty bad thing to deal with. And by having a quarantine tank, you can leave those fish in quarantine, observe them. If there are any issues, you can treat them separately, versus if you're treating your whole tank over here, you've got existing fish. The healthy fish might start getting stressed due to the medicines. A lot of those medicines can have different impacts on fish. While the ultimate goal is to cure the fish, the healthy fish might also suffer stress as a result of the medicines. Similarly with humans, sometimes the medicine we take to cure a certain ailment can be a little harsh on our own bodies. So we don't have to take medicine, it's best not to. Same thing with fish. If your fish are healthy, you don't want to treat the healthy fish, you just really want to treat the sick fish. Another advantage of having a quarantine tank is if you have fish that are fighting. If you've got a particular fish, the tank boss, so to speak, is beating up on a particular fish, sometimes removing the tank boss out of the tank, putting him in quarantine for a little while, letting the tank sort itself out, basically a new pecking order is established, bringing that tank boss back in, seeing how it plays out. Sometimes that tank boss is no longer the tank boss, as well as the fish who was picked on can recover. Vice versa too, if the fish who has been picked on was also beaten up pretty badly, putting them in the quarantine tank alone where nobody else is bothering them, you can focus on them only. If they need some medications to be treated for injuries, you can feed them different foods as well too. They get their own little space and they get a chance to heal up without the other fish bothering them. Now, if you do have aggression issues, that'll be a topic for another video. So aggression issues with different fish, yes, taking them out, putting them in a timeout tank, quarantine tank is a great idea. But if you put them back in, you see the situation goes back to the same again, where one fish is being picked on by other fish, then maybe it's best to change that setup in your tank. Either remove that one fish who's being picked on or take the aggressive fish out, depending on what you want to do. Move that aggressive fish somewhere else, rehome it, put it in a different tank, give it to somebody else who can handle that type of fish in their tank, and then go on from there. Another benefit with having a quarantine tank is if you happen to have fish who start reproducing. Basically, you got little babies swimming around in there. Depending on the other fish, sometimes those fry might be left alone. They might have enough hiding places. But if you want to ensure their success, and you do have fish in there who are going to pick them off, who are going to eat those fry, then it might be best to take those fry out, put them in your quarantine tank, let them raise up over there, let them grow bigger, and then later on, if you want to, you can either sell those fish, put them back in your tank, put them back in another tank. Those fish are safe and sound. Now, if you know you have a breeding pair of fish and you have that extra quarantine tank, you could always take that breeding pair of fish, put them in the quarantine tank, let them do their thing over there. Once the fry have hatched, depending on the type of fish, some fish will actually care for their fry, they'll protect their fry, make sure that everything in and around their environment is safe. Some other fish, on the other hand, eat their fry. So depending on those type of fish, once the eggs are in there, once the eggs have hatched, you can take those parents out, put them back in the main tank, and let those fry raise up to adults. So for those of us who do have multiple tanks, if you got more than one tank, setting up a small quarantine tank in a different area, even in the same area, is helpful. So depending on the size of your fish, something as small as a 10-gallon would work. If you got a little larger fish, then you might need to step into a 20-gallon, 29-gallon, depending on how big your fish are. So in terms of operating that tank, with my quarantine tank, if nobody's in there, nobody's going in there, I do unplug the heater, and the only thing I keep running is the filter. I've got two filters in that tank. It's actually over-filtered. I've got the sponge filter driven by an air pump. I've also got a power filter on the back of the tank over there. It's just extra filter in case I need to use that filter on a different tank. Both those filters are live and running. There's bacteria in there, there's snails in there. So there's plenty of biological activity going on there to keep the cycle going, keep that nitrogen cycle going. Right now in my quarantine tank, I do have a pleco in there that I purchased a little while ago. That pleco is in there, so the heater is on, the filters are running, and I'm feeding that fish on a regular basis. Now, if nobody was in there, if there was no fish in there, I do have some snails in there. Those snails are not sensitive to the temperature, so I can unplug the heater. And by unplugging the heater, I do save some energy, but the tank will still be running. I do actually let the light run as well in there too, because I do have live plants in there and I want those plants to thrive. So when it comes to the quarantine tank, you can quarantine things like plants, you can quarantine your invertebrates, snails, shrimp, fish, and basically you're putting them in that quarantine tank just to observe them, treat them if they need treating, and then just go from there. If they do need treating, the nice thing about a quarantine tank is, let's say you've got a 40-gallon here or 75-gallon here, like I've got big tank. When you're treating a quarantine tank, if it's a 10-gallon, 20-gallon, it's actually going to be much cheaper to treat that tank because a lot of your medicines are treated based on the amount of gallons you have in a tank. So if you have to treat a 75-gallon tank over here, that's going to take a lot more medicine than if you're treating, say, a 10-gallon tank or a 20-gallon tank. So that saves you money in the long run. Same time, too, if you got other fish in these regular tanks here, I don't really want to treat them if they don't need treating, so it's better off to treat them in the quarantine tank. Now, when it comes to quarantining your fish, if you know you got fish coming, either you're going to pick them up at the local pet store or you're getting them shipped to you, you want to make sure that tank is up and fully running. So like in my case, I do keep the tank up and running, at least filter-wise, not necessarily heating-wise, but if you have nothing running, it's always helpful to have an active filter, basically an active sponge filter, or either a filter pad from your hang on the back. Pop that active media from your existing filter into your quarantine tank so that way it's cycled and up and running, but you still need to make sure you're testing on a regular basis as well, just to make sure there's no spike in ammonia or nitrites or anything like that. If there are, you should have on hand chemicals to lock those things up, like ammonia, like nitrite, like excess nitrates. That way your new fish do not suffer in that quarantine tank. At the same time, too, you're pulling that filter media off your existing tank. You don't want to starve your existing tank of bacteria, so make sure you've got extra filters running. Like in this case here, this 40-gallon tank right behind me, I've got 2 sponge filters in there. I can always pull one off. There's still one in there. My bioload isn't heavy in there, so even if I pull one off, I can pop that into my quarantine tank if I needed to, and that will suffice over there. And then later on I can put it back in this tank. Having 3 filters, if let's say you've got this tank over here and then you've got a quarantine tank, so having 3 filters, so you've got 3 filters, you keep 3 in here running. Anytime you need to start that quarantine tank up, you can pull one out. You still got 2 in here to handle everything else. Put it in that tank over there. Put your fish in there for quarantine, for healing, for whatnot. You should have no issues with ammonia or nitrites going crazy in the tank and hurting your fish. So how long should you be quarantining for? So the opinions on that vary. Some of my local fish store over here, they'll quarantine their fish for 2 weeks, and after that they feel it's fine. In my case, I prefer to do it 4 weeks, basically a month. So I'll put them in there for 4 weeks, observe them, feed them. If there's any issues, treat them as necessary. Similarly too, when I bring in new plants and when I bring in new invertebrates such as snails, I will also put them in the quarantine tank over there for a similar length of 4 weeks. Let them stay in there, observe them, and then assuming everything is okay, don't see any issues, then I can transfer those into the tank that they're supposed to be going after that. One thing I did want to add is that if you do add additional fish to your quarantine, if you're already quarantining fish in there, invertebrates in there, plants in there, whatever, and then you happen to get some more fish, more plants, whatnot, in my opinion, I would start that quarantine period over again. So if you've already gone through 2 weeks, you had some more fish in that quarantine tank, I would make it another total of 4 weeks, just because you've got new fish in there, and we want to make sure everything is healthy in there before you transfer it into the main tank where they're supposed to go. So that's my opinion. For those of you who only have one tank, you might not necessarily have the space for a quarantine tank. So I understand that a lot of people don't want to get an extra tank, then that's just going to add extra work. It's going to take up extra space. Some alternatives to that is if you do have aggressive fish and you need to put some of those fish in timeout, or you need to separate some of fish to let them heal up. You can always get these floating containers that can go in the tank. Basically, they just float at the top over there. The fish is isolated. They're inside a separate container. The water can still flow through back and forth. You can get certain things like this. This is a net that basically you assemble, you pop it in the tank. It basically floats on the top of the tank. The fish goes inside. This one is actually a complete net with a frame. So basically there's a netting that goes around the frame. So the water still goes in and out of this little container over here. The fish aren't isolated water-wise, but they're isolated from the other fish, that either the fish inside here can't attack other fish, or the fish, if they're being attacked, they're in here, they can't be attacked by the fish on the inside. So that's one option if you don't want to put a quarantine tank up. Now when it comes to decorating the quarantine tank, in my opinion, lesser is better. That particular quarantine tank I have over there, that doesn't have any substrate in it. It's a bare bottom tank. It's got a couple rocks in there, it's got a couple plants in there, and some other decorations. So the less the better, because when it comes time to cleaning, it's easier to clean it up. Whereas if you've got a full tank, you've got so many rocks, so many decorations. If you've got substrate in there and you need to drain that tank, you need to clean it out, having all that stuff in there just makes it a little harder. Now you do want to keep some stuff in there. You can purchase these PVC tubes, these small tubes, just put it in there, especially if you've got skittish fish. Fish who are a little nervous, they get a place to hide. They can go inside those tubes. They can hide behind the tubes. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you have a quarantine tank, and how have you set it up? Do you keep it running? Do you shut it down? Or do you have some different process for quarantining your fish? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.